Hi everyone, this is Masonic or Not, our third episode. I'm Nico,
My name is AJ.
My name is Keon.
and we have a very special guest here, Eugene Sullivan, who is the Grand Representative of the Grand Lodge of Ireland.
Thank you, Nico. Good to be here.
Good to have you here. Just tell us something. Tell us how your journey started.
How my Masonic journey started, I guess it started back in London, England, with my accountant. His name was Thomas Cook, Thomas Cook. Thomas still very much alive and with us. A little over 20 years ago. And he basically said that I needed to be with people like myself. And I didn't quite understand what he meant at the time. I understand it now. Masons are caring thinkers. Whatever else a Mason is, he has to care and he has to think. If you really don't think, if the biggest thing in your head is the ball game or whether the Red Sox beat the Yellow Sox, you can't be a Mason. And if you don't care, you're not fit to be a Mason.
Same with soccer, right?
Pretty much the same in Europe. Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. It was the same deal. If you don't care, you're not fit to be a Mason. Masons are people that they care about the important issues and they think about the important issues. And I suppose in some ways, maybe in the last 40 or 50 years, the craft, it went into decline. And one of the reasons it went into decline was that our people, especially our young men, didn't get a chance to express what they really were thinking about, what was important to them, and what's important to the craft. The American Revolution was, in several ways, a direct result of Freemasonry, of the Masonic lodges, that there was a better way to go, there was a better way to be governed, a better way to live in society. We weren't supposed to be looking up to people because they were born a marquis or an earl. We weren't supposed to obey dictatorial governments. We were supposed to be thinking, caring citizens as opposed to subjects. And we were supposed to have an input into how we were governed, into how the laws were made and what these laws were. Unfortunately, I think since then it's gone down and down. The government has been further and further removed from the citizens, further removed from the people. But the vision is still there, and it's a Masonic vision.
Amen.
Absolutely.
Amen.
Nice. Nicely said.
Very profound. And Eugene is not only a brother of the craft, he was worshipful master of Vegas Lodge 32 in the centennial year, 2008. How was that year like?
It was a very interesting year, but it was a year probably too cluttered to do the things that really, really mattered. We did the things that mattered, and we did them reasonably well, if I say so myself. It brought a lot of attention to Vegas Lodge, and it gave the worshipful master, I can't remember who he was now at the time, a good excuse to kick things into shape, and that there was going to be no excuses to, you're not to be sloppy or slipshod or sloppy ritual, because that was a problem back then. In the last decades of the 20th century, the 1990s particularly, the craft was quite demoralized.
Wow.
Almost, the ritual was very sloppy.
Were
Anything
you-
kind of goes.
Were you a member? How long have you been a Mason, first and foremost?
A little less than 20 years, I
Okay.
believe. Yeah.
Wow.
And at that time when I came in, there was a group of us actually. We called ourselves the Young Turks. The immediate past Grand Master of Nevada, Lou Castle, was a Young Turk, and he's very
Wow.
proud to talk about it to this day. We started doing things right. Yeah. We started getting the rituals to be pretty spiffy, pretty bang on. First of all, people started to know their work better, and then they started to deliver it better.
Yeah.
But the big thing that I'm talking about, the big thing in Masonry is the fellowship between the members. And a lot of our program has been added to and added to and added to over the years. And there isn't a chance to have proper fellowship anymore. We clutter our nights with one little piece of procedure after another. And it's since this lockdown that I've got to get to know some of my brothers better. It's a fantastic experience. I never realized that some of my brothers had such good ideas, that they thought about such important things, and that I can share minds with people. It's great.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right. It's Freemasonry personally has changed my life because of the men that I've met here. And
All of our lives.
all of our lives. And I want to say too, one of the most spiritual experiences I've had within the lodge room was because of you and your work and one of your lectures. Amazing.
Okay, I
Eugene is the
deliver the
amazing
second.
lecturer.
And for those who don't know, in Nevada Masonry, Eugene is definitely recognized as one of the finest ritualists that we have. And, whether it's to be able to recite things that take an hour just to say from memory is an amazing thing in itself, but to deliver it with passion. And we love your Irish accent as well. So when you deliver it with that, it really just, you're captivating.
Absolutely.
And, so we want to share that with the people who are watching.
Absolutely. I think we should
context.
also mention what ritual is for those who aren't Masons.
Right.
Okay, we open and close our meetings with a set format. It's a ritual, very like a religious ritual. Masons are very adamant that we are not a religion. In some ways, we are like a church. And we open to a set format, questions and answers.
Right, and structure.
And, floor movements of different people. That's what ritual is. It's very important. If you ever look at a small child, small children love their little rituals. It seems to be a very important part of being human. Children make up their own little rituals. They'll ask a question and they'll want a set answer. It shouldn't dominate a meeting. It should never really be the whole of brothers getting together. But it's a very important part of the same. I believe that fellowship is the most important part, where we can share our minds, where we can have Masonic discourse, where we can have a laugh, where we can have a good time. Fellowship is the part where we really look forward to our meetings. But ritual is a very important component of being human, basically.
Yeah, there's a time
That's powerful.
there's a time to be serious. There's a time to be
Absolutely.
somber. There's a time to be joyous and have recreational fun. But we call it work for a reason.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We call it work,
Labor.
but it's important work. And like I said, it's intrinsic to being human, because small children, they write their own little rituals. It's really interesting to watch them, But never forget the fellowship. And we have cluttered our meetings with so much, that there is no time for ritual anymore. I mean, what part of a Masonic meeting really expresses the core, the heart of Masonry? The spirit of goodness. That's what Masonry is a spirit of goodness. It happens during fellowship.
Right.
Exactly.
Where do we make friends? Where do we get to know one another? During
Correct.
fellowship. Where do
Correct.
we get to relate to our brothers across this country, across the world?
Right.
It's again during fellowship. And what I said earlier, the bit we look forward to in our meetings, above all, is the fellowship. Men of goodwill getting together. It's one of the finest experiences you can have, discussing things that caring thinkers discuss and sharing ideas in Masonic discourse. There is nothing like it. And there is nothing in the whole modern consumer society for caring thinkers that compares with Masonry. Yes, there are other groups. Some of them are very small. Some of them are like churches, and they make you subscribe to a whole list of doctrines and dogmas. Young people, young men are not drawn to the likes of that. They like to think for themselves.
Wow.
But Masonry,
Freemasonry.
the doctrines are
Freethinkers.
minimal. There are very few. Yeah, we do believe that a human being is not a mechanism. There is some kind of a higher power there. We are very open as to what kind of a higher power it is, but we do not believe that the human mind is a mechanical transformation of protein soup.
That's very beautifully said.
Protein
Well
soup.
said.
If that belief is good enough for you, then Masonry is not for you.
Right.
But our beliefs are minimal, and from there we can have fantastic discourse on building ideas, building principles, building all kinds of opinions and changing them, transforming them.
Being free thinkers.
One of the I was going to say one of the exciting things I think that's naturally happening right now is the older generation is kind of passing the torch, which are kind of what us three right here are kind of an embodiment of some older gentlemen that wanted to see younger gentlemen get involved with the craft the way they did, and it's kind of a beautiful thing to see their joy, because I think some of their frustration from what has been communicated to me has seeing the older generation kind of stay in that position of power and not involve the younger men and women of the Masonic organizations, so that they can get excited and feel like they're a part of it as well. And I think it's wonderful, because what you also realize in Freemasonry is that it's about older men, older people passing on
Passing it
wisdom.
down.
Is passing it down. It's the process of teaching you the craft of building yourself up as a person that's going to be useful in society.
That's a hugely important point. Since World War II, the media was telling people that younger people were a totally different entity to their parents, their grandparents, that the older generation had nothing to offer them in the line of wisdom. Now, what they were not told was that the media bosses were actually older than their parents. It was a very interesting phenomenon, because if you look at, say, go back to the 1950s, when the teenager was invented, popular music was almost their church, and the transistor radio was their traveling pulpit. And they listened to this pulpit faithfully. They obeyed all of its instructions. And part of this message that was got across was that their parents had nothing to offer. Well, parents have an awful lot of experience to offer their children and their grandchildren. It needs to be passed on. Otherwise, you're going to get cultural sterility. You are going to get a situation which we have right now, where a whole generation or maybe two generations of people have forgotten how to sing. And I'm not just talking about singing. Now, that's a tragedy. A whole generation have become culturally sterile in the Western world, or two generations, in fact.
Unfortunately.
And we talked, me and you talked about this, how important tradition is. Nowadays, there isn't much tradition that's being passed down. And that's the beautiful thing about Freemasonry. It's a hundreds of year old tradition that's being passed down and kept alive.
That's a fantastic point. If you look at probably the outstanding example of this, now I may have the year wrong, but I believe it was 1977 that Alex Haley brought out the movie Roots. He brought it out as a book first and then as a movie. Black Americans suddenly found themselves able to access a tradition. They devoured it. They absolutely swallowed it, because tradition is empowering. It's grounding.
I like that.
It brings you peace. It brings you all kinds of ability. If we're cut off from our own traditions, we live in a wasteland.
Shout out to Prince Hall.
Yeah, exactly.
The first
Absolutely.
Black Mason.
Eugene, since you're here, I really am burning to ask you this question. Because I'm European too, I really want to know, what do you think? I still haven't been in Europe after I became a Master Mason. So what do you think are the difference between European Freemasonry and American Freemasonry?
Okay.
Great question.
Better, some I'll give you the worst thing about American Masonry first. I'll start with the bad news. There is this idea here that we have to combine an obligation ceremony and a lecture, and I know I do one of the lectures, but we have this idea we have to combine the obligation ceremony and the lecture into one very long, very boring meeting. And the sideliners, as in Europe we call them the columns, they have nothing to do but sit there for hour after hour, because it's usually close to 3 hours, a little less for a first and second degree, a bit more for a third. But they have nothing to do but sit there like battery fowl, looking forward and in silence. It's no wonder that we have such a low retention rate. Now, in Europe, right, they never do that. They never will combine a lecture with an obligation ceremony. If Robert Burns, a very famous Mason, his meetings took 45 to 50 minutes. That's the silent part of a meeting. A meeting is defined, by the way, by mandatory silence. If we can all have a chat together at the same time or at different times, it's not a meeting. But if you have to be silent until you're called on by the presiding officer of the meeting, that defines a meeting. Mandatory silence is fantastic for getting business done. But mandatory silence is the negation of fellowship. You cannot have fellowship. And it kind of reaches its optimum somewhere between 45 minutes and an hour. That way you can get a good lot of business done and you still have a good lot of time for fellowship afterwards. There are better parts about American Masonry, though. And the big part, and you mentioned it, I think, AJ, earlier, is that American Masonry involves the families of Masons.
Yeah.
Okay, our rituals are, we are a fraternity and there are sororities. Our rituals are for men. But the spirit and the fellowship and the company of Masonry should never be for men only.
No.
Here in the United States, we have, especially the Eastern Star, but we have several Masonic organizations for women, and we have youth groups, we have D. Malay, we have Job's Daughters, and we have the Rainbow Girls. Now, that is the absolute crowning glory of American Masonry, the way we involve our families in the whole Masonic community.
Beautiful. So this is not a thing in Europe?
No, it's barely there in Europe. There is Eastern Star in Scotland. I don't believe there is a Masonic youth organization in the entire European continent.
Oh, wow.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that either.
That's sad.
That's really sad, yeah.
Maybe because it's more serious. Would you say so? Or
Sorry, I didn't understand the question.
I said maybe it's, I feel like, do you think European Freemasonry, they take themselves more seriously?
Probably. If you go to now, Scotland, Ireland, and England are the only countries to which I've been. Scottish Masonry is got the ritual, the dress of Masons. Nobody would dream of going to a Scottish lodge in jeans and running shoes. The Tyler, which is the person at the door, would have him out of the building so fast that he wouldn't know what hit him. They have, and the ritual is beautiful. There might be the odd slip, but and you know, nobody's perfect. The only perfect ritualist is the guy complaining on the sidelines. But but the ritual is way better than over here.
Eugene, can you also, I'm sorry, real quick, just for the people who are watching and don't know, we had a great question in our comments about the difference between an actual Mason and a Freemason.
Okay, the words are used interchangeably. A Mason technically is a person who builds a building out of brick or stone. We call ourselves free and accepted Masons because our society is modeled on the stonemason guilds of the Middle Ages. Now, there is definitely a difference of opinion in whether we actually evolved from those stonemasons guilds. I don't believe we did. I think there's another explanation for the origin of Masonry.
So they were probably just used as a symbol.
I think so. I think it was used symbolically. Exactly, Nico. They were. I got a little pamphlet from the Grand Lodge of England, which is in Queen Street and is open to the public to visit, by the way. And I would recommend everybody to. It's regarded as the premier Grand Lodge in the world, the Grand Lodge of England. But there is it mentions, their pamphlet, it mentions another theory. The other theory is that in the late 1500s and early 1600s, there was a group which was interested in the promotion of religious and political tolerance in an age of great intolerance, when differences of opinion on matters of religion and politics would lead to killing and civil war. And by using allegory and symbolism, that these men decided to form a society to basically bring progress to mankind. And that seems to fit in very well with the whole idea of the American Revolution, because the American Revolution didn't just take place in America.
Right.
It had a profound effect on the hearts and minds of people all across, right across from basically the Western colonies at the time, which were probably Kentucky, as far as Russia, right across the European world. It had a huge effect on people's consciousness, on people's minds. There were, and my own country, Ireland, we had a huge rebellion in 1798 trying to implement Republican or really Masonic principles.
Wow. And it just, I don't know, it feels like that's what's happening in a way right now, too. There's a lot of division that I see personally on social media with politics,
I have to say I like social media. At least people are giving their views. I don't see it as harmful as television.
Okay.
I at least in social media you have a million different views, whereas with television we had the same view repeated again and again and again until it bypassed our intellectual or critical faculties and got drilled into our subconscious. At least with the social media, one person says this, another person says that. And, intelligent people can compare and contrast the different viewpoints. Actually, you brought me back to something you mentioned earlier, Nico, for caring, thinking young men and young women with the affiliated organizations. There is really nowhere else to go, only tiny bodies or bodies that are weighed down with doctrines and dogma. Masonry is the only place that a caring, thinking young person can go. But I'll tell you, we have our work to do to bring the craft, to bring the fraternity into line with the people that we are.
Amen. Amen.
So mote it be.
Nicely said.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Another kind of a spectator question. You guys were talking about European. I've been told by different brothers that America kind of has the English version of Freemasonry, and that there's another kind of a French continental version that made its way on the Southern Americas, and that our understanding is a little bit different than that. Even things like when you hear the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, people automatically associate it with Scotland, but of course, understanding its French origins. Could you help us understand just some of the misuse of country associations?
There are more than two.
Okay.
But there is a type of French, the Grand Orient, and they allow atheists to be members. And that is a tradition within Freemasonry. It also applied to Russia. What a lot of people don't realize, in Russia for a very long time, for 100 years, more than 100 years, almost 200 years, the language of the aristocracy was French. Babies learned to speak in French if they were above a certain social level. Leo Tolstoy almost certainly learned to speak in French. So French Freemasonry and the Grand Orient. Now, there is another Grand Lodge. For a lot of us, that's alien. The idea of a human being thinking of himself as a mechanism, I think, is a negation of Masonic principles. We don't have to believe in any specific creed or any specific dogma.
Right.
But we do have to believe that a human being is a spirit, not a mechanism.
Wow.
But like they said, there's a lot of traditions. It's hard to
Are
summarize
you
them all.
saying the French Orion is accepting more like the humans are more like a mechanism?
That's what if there is no cosmic thought force, if there is no ultimate thought force, then a human
Grand
being is a
architect.
mechanism.
Well, I thought they're just accepting atheists, but they still accept the idea that there is a higher power. That was my understanding.
I have to tell you, Nico, that I don't know that. Yeah, they will accept an atheist.
Or at least
Well, what-
somebody who says they don't, or maybe an agnostic, someone who says they don't know.
An agnostic is slightly different
Right.
than that. An agnostic says, I know that you don't know.
Right.
It's not that I don't know. I know that's a direct translation from the Greek and agnostic. Gnosco, Latin is to know. The actual, just on a funny point, the Latin for agnostic, agnostic is a Greek word. The Latin equivalent is actually ignoramus. It's kind of an
We
interesting.
understand that.
It's but another point altogether. I actually have to say, Nico, that I do not know whether the Grand Orient accepts a higher power, but will allow brothers who do not believe in it.
Bottom line is there's different Orients, different Grand Lodges, different edicts that we follow, different jurisdictions that we acknowledge, and so the word clandestine is often used. But yeah, I just wanted to open that question honestly, just because
And a good
World
question it
within a
is.
world.
yeah, there are absolutely.
A good question it is.
Yeah, good.
So should we talk about the painting in these last couple of minutes that we have about what did you?
Yeah. Hieronymus Bosch, he's Flemish. He painted a picture called The Wayfarer. Now, it must be part of my Masonic journey because I was particularly drawn to the painting as a teenager. And for 2 generations, my family were not Masons at all. They were Catholic, and Catholics were ordered out of Freemasonry in Ireland by the Catholic Church, by the hierarchy. But I was particularly drawn to this picture. It shows a person moving from one kind of a world to another. He's moving from a really dirty, cluttered, squalid kind of a world. He's passing through a gate into a pastoral land of peace and harmony. Now, if you look at the painting as a map, the Wayfarer is moving from west to east. But there's an incredible number, at least 20 Masonic symbols in that picture. Hieronymus Bosch painted it around 1510. So there is very little doubt that Bosch was a Mason, or what was becoming Masonry at the time.
Well, before we close, we have like 3 more minutes. Is there any final words that you want to say, Eugene, about anything?
I'm learning and getting to know our younger members more now than I ever did in 20 years. I've probably learned more in 1 year when our entire agenda was suspended due to this lockdown. And I am meeting some great people. Our craft must be changed. It must be adapted to develop our best. I think at the end of the last century, we were going towards the lowest common denominator. But there are some great, super people within Masonry. We need to develop the craft to give these more prominence, more power in shaping the craft in the next 100 years.
Beautiful.
Beautiful.
Beautiful. Well, yeah, that was my last question.
All right. Well, that was the 3rd episode of Masonic or Not. Eugene Sullivan. I'm Nico.
I'm AJ.
I'm Keon. Shout out to Vegas 32.
And we'll see you in our next episode.
We are the
All right.
Centurion, Masonic or Not.
Take care.
Peace.